This is a video in a series of videos I'm making for a class I teach at ASU, PHI 328, History of Ancient Philosophy. Now, in the course, we've been thinking about theories in Plato's middle dialogues. In the last video, I talked about the theory of recollection. This time, the subject is the theory known as the theory of forms. This theory we see in the dialogue, Phaedo. The Phaedo is thought to be a middle dialogue. In the tetralogy that describes Socrates' life and time, it's the fourth one. We see in the Euthyphro, Socrates before his trial, the Apology at his trial, the Crito after his trial and before his last day, and the Phaedo is on his last day. And his friends have come to visit him in the jail cell while he's going to be executed later that day. And the conversation turns to the question of why he's not afraid of death, right? His friends see him, he's in good spirits. And this question comes up, why, Socrates, since you know this is your last day, why aren't you afraid about what's going to happen to you? And he explains that he's not afraid because he's a lover of wisdom. Now, remember, we've seen that word, lover of wisdom. It translates a Greek word that transliterates as philosophy, but we've been using it in its literal meaning, lover of wisdom. And we've seen Socrates pursue the love of wisdom in the earlier dialogues, right? We've seen him primarily search for a definition. And we know that the general meaning of the word, someone's a lover of wisdom, what that means is that he places wisdom, very high value on wisdom, puts it at the center of his life, and arranges things in his life in order to get wisdom. Now, in the Phaedo, we're seeing a take on this that's new. Plato is focusing in on what Socrates is doing from Plato's point of view in the search for definitions. He thinks he's trying to grasp these objects that are called forms in the dialogue. Now we can see where Plato's coming from here if we look at the Euthyphro. So let's get to the lecture. Here we are at the syllabus. Let's go down, okay, to the lecture notes, and now we'll go to, let's see here, the theory of forms. And then I think I have it here somewhere. Let's see here. Right, here we go. So we have here Socrates talking to Euthyphro. And remember, with the Euthyphro, he has a little trouble giving an answer to Socrates that's in the right form. Remember, he initially, when Socrates asks the what is piety question, Euthyphro gives a list of examples of actions he takes to be pious. And Socrates says he's not looking for a list, that he wants what traditionally is called a definition. And the way this gets put here is Socrates here is the speaker. He says, tell me the form by which all pious acts are pious. That's what he wants to know about. Now, if we take a look, we can look at this Greek word real quickly. If we go to the text, where did that go? There we go. Look at the Greek. See if I can find it. There it is, right here. So the translator here is not giving not translating this, not using the word form, but this is the traditional Greek word here that gets translated as form. And in the passage, in the notes, that's how I've given it to us as form. And so Socrates is looking for a form. And as we know, the early dialogues always end in perplexity. That's to say, they never find a definition that the interlocutor successfully defends from Socrates' questions. And so that's how these dialogues go. And so Socrates keeps asking. And so he's trying to, from Plato's point of view, he's trying to grasp the forms. And Plato takes that to be what the lover of wisdom does. Now, in the Phaedo, Plato makes the character Socrates say that the body is an obstacle to grasping the forms. And we saw something about what this meant in the theory of recollection when we thought about the ontological thesis. Now, I said character Socrates because remember, we have to keep in mind that there's two Socrates. There's the historical figure, the man who lived and died, and then there's the character in Plato's dialogues. And it's always a little delicate to know who we have. Or do we have the character, or do we have the historical figure? We've thought that in the earlier dialogues, what Plato is doing is not strictly history. He's not limiting himself to simply saying what the historical Socrates said. Rather, he's taking the sorts of things that the historical Socrates said and placing them sometimes in fictional contexts and trying to present them in ways that will help him understand what Socrates was talking about when he was talking about the love of wisdom. Now, when we get to the middle dialogues, we get views, we get the character Socrates expressing views that don't look very much like anything the historical Socrates would have believed. And what we have here in the Phaedo is an example of that, right? So Plato in the Phaedo, he's using the character Socrates to say things that he thinks give us a plausible interpretation for what the love of wisdom is, the thing that Socrates was devoted to. And one issue is, we saw that the definitions seem to be hard to get, at least in the early dialogues. No one ever satisfactorily gets one. And so we get the suggestion here in the Phaedo that really it's because of the body, right? So Socrates, the character, tells us in the theory of recollection, subject to the last video, that when the soul descends into the body, it gets confused and forgets its own interest and goes on to live a life appropriate to the body. And that the lover of wisdom understands this. He understands what's happened to him, and he tries to stop living the life that he had been living, and instead to live the sort of life we see Socrates, the character, as being portrayed to live in the dialogues. Now, the character in earlier dialogues is hopeful about the afterlife. We see that kind of hope in the Apology, for example, but really getting something pretty new in the Phaedo. Plato's trying out the idea that the soul has a practical interest in the forms only because it's forced on it by the fact that it's in the body, and that that's the kinds of things we saw Socrates in the earlier dialogues trying to do. He was interested in the forms and the definitions primarily so that he could behave in a certain way. We saw at the end of the Euthyphro, he wants to know what piety is so that he'll be able to defend himself at his upcoming trial. Here we're pairing that kind of practical interest in the forms with this idea that once the soul's outside the body, it has an interest in forms that's not practical. It just somehow, and this is a very perplexing thing about the Phaedo and about Plato, somehow the soul just has knowledge of these forms. And having this knowledge is is the goal, as Plato understands it, right? You try, if you're Socrates, you try all your life to search for definitions, and you are when you die, the idea is that you get the knowledge that you are searching for during your life. Now, this picture of the soul existing after death, right? It's going to take some argument to convince us that it's sensible. And Socrates' interlocutors, Simmias and Cebes, they say as much. They say, look, this is a striking view you have, Socrates. We're going to need a lot of argument for us to accept it. And a large part of the Phaedo is a series of arguments that are designed to show that the soul does go on to exist after death. Now, we don't look at these. We're not looking at those in this course. Of course, you can look at them while you have free access to the Phaedo, and all you have to do is flip through it. You'll see those arguments. For our focus here, we're more interested in the argument for the existence of forms. And let's go there in the notes. We're sort of already there. Let's try to see if I can move this out of the way a little. There we go. So we saw the Greek word before. This is just the plural form of it. Socrates in this passage is talking about the forms. There's somehow a reality that in dialectic we give an account of, an answer to our questions, right? So in the Euthyphro, we're trying to say what piety is. And if we manage to do that successfully, we've specified the form. And Socrates talks about the form and of piety and forms generally having a different kind of existence than than the things we are most familiar with. So he contrasts men, horses, and cloaks. Right, these are the kinds of things he takes that we see with our eyes, and that they're subject to change. And he contrasts those with the forms which we don't see with our eyes. You can only get at them through what he calls reasoning of the intellect. Right, so they're only objects, they're the kind of objects we can know only by thinking, not by seeing. And the idea is that they don't change, right, at all from circumstance to circumstance, but the things, the men, the horses and the cloaks, the examples here, they all do change. Now, we can kind of get some idea of what this means if we, right, so here he says, you don't see these things with your eyes. Let's see here. Right, so I gave an example here with respect to the Euthyphro. Suppose we manage to know what the form is, and then it'll be what we encounter from circumstance to circumstance. It won't change. Whenever we have something that's pious, we're going to have this very same form. But the action that's pious, right, may not always be pious in different contexts, right? So in one set of circumstances, one thing could be pious, acting one way could be pious. and another set acting another way could be pious. But as long as we have something that's pious, we have the form, and it's going to be the same from circumstance to circumstance. And Socrates' idea here is that, as Plato represents him, is that somehow or another these forms are a kind of give us the kind of structure of reality, and that the soul somehow or another after death comes to understand this aspect of reality, and that this existence is what what the soul is trying to do. This is what it's trying to get. And so we have this picture here of the um, soul starting out in a different world, a world of forms and the gods, and then descending into the body, and then spending its time, if it's a lover of wisdom, trying to get straight on what the forms are. And this, to the extent that it does this, it will prepare itself for its existence in the afterlife when it's free of the body and it finally gets what it wants, which is knowledge of the forms. So, there's two ideas here, right? So there's the otherworldly perspective that Plato is casting Socrates in, and then there is the objects that he calls the forms. The forms themselves, they're not, I mean, we could obviously question whether there really are any such objects, but they're not too unusual. It's not too hard to think that they exist. It's a little harder, though, to think that Plato here is right about the soul. Okay, so that's our theory of form. So far we've looked at two of the four theories we're going to look at. Remember, we started with the theory of recollection. We've now gone on to the theory of forms. Next time we'll go on to the tripartite theory of the soul, and then finally we'll finish up with the theory of justice.